A small opening gave Thomas just enough space to catch a breath. He tried to calm himself, slowing his breathing down. He knew that panicking would only make things worse, but he couldn't ignore the thought that everyone nearby was likely too busy dealing with the aftermath of the landslide. It was unlikely anyone was looking for him yet, and the thought of what might happen if help didn't come soon made his chest tighten. He was nearly trapped, stuck in thick, heavy mud that held him in place. Then a shadow moved past the small gap. After a few seconds of silence, he felt something shift. The weight above him changed. It made him think maybe someone had found him. Maybe he was finally being pulled out. He closed his eyes, bracing himself, thinking about his life. He didn't want it to end like this. The man who had spent his whole career helping both people and wildlife as a national park ranger was now the one in need of rescue. Out of nowhere, a memory popped into his head, a rescue he'd led involving a lion stuck on a cliff. It distracted him, oddly enough. He thought he saw something that looked like sandy fur through the gap, but maybe his mind was playing tricks on him. Still, that one memory gave him something else to focus on, pulling him briefly away from his fear. Helping others had always come naturally to Thomas. Ever since he was a kid, all he wanted was to become a national park ranger. Getting the job had been one of the happiest days of his life, and not long after, he became more than just someone doing his duty. He turned into a reliable friend to both animals and fellow rangers. The national park meant everything to him. Even when his shift was over, he often stayed behind, finishing up work or just being there for coworkers who needed someone to talk to. People always said he was one of the kindest folks they knew. Hearing that meant a lot to him. It reminded him that what he was doing mattered. The animals in the park had freedom and safety, allowed to live as they would in the wild. Still, that made things hard sometimes, especially when Thomas had to step back and let nature take its course. He knew the rules about not interfering, but there were moments when he wished he could step in. But building any kind of dependence on people wasn't the answer. These animals had to thrive on their own. The park's job was just to keep them safe from threats like poachers. If you asked Thomas what he loved most about his work, he'd struggle to give just one answer. But watching the lions was definitely near the top. Being around the last wild Asiatic lions was something special. He'd watch them in the early hours as they played and roared, and later, when the day was winding down, he'd quietly take in the sight of them resting in the golden evening light. Early one morning, Thomas hopped into his Jeep, ready to do his usual rounds and make sure everything was in order at the park. Because the park was so massive, each ranger was assigned a specific zone to patrol. Today, Thomas was excited. He'd been assigned the cliffside area, home to one of the largest lion prides. He loved that spot. The rocky ledges and uneven surfaces made perfect resting places and lookout points for the lions. Even after all his time on the job, seeing a lion perched high on a cliff, gazing out over its land, still left him speechless. But it wasn't just a breathtaking view. It was also a reminder of the risks. These cliffs were tricky, especially for younger lions who hadn't yet learned to spot danger. Thomas had never seen anything go wrong himself, but the older rangers often shared stories of lions having close calls. The recent dry spell only made things worse. The heat had caused the rock to crack more easily, making chunks of the cliff more likely to break away. He glanced at his watch and realized he was ahead of schedule. That meant he could hang back for a little while and enjoy watching the lions before moving on. The sun had just started to rise over the cliffs, and a few lions were already stretching and moving around near the top. This pride had several cubs, so Thomas felt relieved to see them sticking close to the older lions. As the little ones began exploring and playing, he watched them with a quiet smile. It felt like one of those perfect moments. But it didn't last long. His calm quickly turned into concern when he noticed a group of cubs playing dangerously close to the cliff's edge. Bits of rock started breaking off under their paws. The ground was dry, too dry, and rain hadn't touched the park in weeks. Watching closely, Thomas hoped the pride would pick up on the danger before anything serious happened. He let out a breath when he saw one of the older lions rise and start motioning to the cubs. But just as he felt reassured, things took a turn. The cubs kept playing, too young to understand the warnings. The elder lion wasn't giving up, though. It let out a loud roar and stepped toward them. That got their attention. The cubs froze, then quickly backed away. But their movements had already done damage. The edge of the cliff, weakened and unstable, gave way under the elder lion. Thomas's stomach dropped as the lion slid, a cloud of dust hiding it from view. The animal barely managed to cling to the edge. One wrong move and it would fall, just like the rocks crumbling below. Thomas grabbed his radio and immediately called for the closest team, explaining the urgency. But he couldn't just wait. The lion was in serious trouble and needed help fast. He jumped back into his jeep and headed toward the cliff, taking it slow and steady. He had to be careful, not just with the road, but also with the lions nearby. Revving the engine and sounding the horn, he tried to scare the pride off without putting himself at risk. Thankfully, the pride began to scatter, especially after the lead lion pulled back. With the area now cleared of the other lions, it was time for Thomas to act. Even though he knew backup was on the way, he couldn't afford to wait. He grabbed the ropes from his jeep and moved carefully toward the cliff's edge. Below, the lion was still struggling, trying to pull itself up. Thomas worked quickly, untying the ropes, knowing they were the only chance to get the animal to safety. Just as he got the ropes ready, he heard the sound of approaching jeeps. Other rangers had arrived, ready to help. Together, they secured the ropes around the lion and began the tense process of pulling him up. It wasn't easy. The lion was heavy, and the cliff was fragile and crumbling. Worse, the lion had lost its grip and now hung in midair, held up only by the ropes. Getting him to safety would take everything they had. Thomas took charge, rallying the team with a clear count. On the count of 3, they all pulled with everything they had. It felt like time stood still. Then, slowly, the lion rose over the edge. Relief washed over Thomas as the lion was finally pulled onto solid ground. But now they faced another challenge. Right in front of them was a fully conscious, frightened, and incredibly strong adult lion. No one could predict what it might do. The other rangers instinctively took a step back, but Thomas didn't move. He looked straight at the lion, holding its gaze. Something in the lion's eyes shifted, like it recognized him. For a moment, there was a quiet understanding. The lion, now lying in the grass, was breathing heavily, worn out from fear and exhaustion. Without hesitation, Thomas knelt down and began untying the ropes. The others watched in disbelief, but Thomas felt no fear. It was as if the lion knew it was safe. And this wouldn't be their last meeting. What came next wasn't something easily forgotten. The image of the lion dangling from the cliff stayed with Thomas. It became one of those memories he couldn't shake. Day after day, a quiet need pulled at him. He hoped to see that lion again. But since the rescue, the big cat had kept to itself. It still roamed the park, but always found places to stay hidden, away from view. As the months passed, the mood in the park began to shift. The monsoon season was approaching fast, and with it came a long list of tasks. Rain was badly needed, but it also brought problems: flooding, damaged habitats, landslides. The rangers had to balance protecting the land with looking out for the animals and keeping everything running. Once the rain started, tension ran high. The team had to keep the park safe, but they also worried about their own families. Everyone felt the pressure. Even as they stayed busy, the memory of the lion rescue still hung in the back of their minds. When the rain finally came, it didn't hold back. It poured with a force that left everyone on edge. Worry became the shared emotion around the park. Thoughts of the lion rescue faded into the background as the team focused on bracing for what the monsoon would bring. Though the rangers dealt with monsoons every year, it never got easier, and some seasons hit harder than others. Within just a few days, Thomas saw the kind of challenges they were up against, battling nature at its most unpredictable. The downpour completely changed the face of the park. Watering holes overflowed, dry grasslands sprang back to life, and flowers began to bloom again. Thomas often marveled at nature's strange balance, how it could cause so much destruction and yet still create something beautiful. But this monsoon was about to show him just how powerful that balance could be. The park was turning into a swamp, and every drive through the waterlogged paths was a test. His jeep struggled more with each passing day as the soaked ground thickened. Water now filled the park's lakes and pools to the brim. Many animals lost their homes, burrows and nests wiped out by the rising water. Huge raindrops slammed against the windshield, blurring his vision, even with the wipers going full speed. In the distance, he spotted what looked like a large log or fallen tree. Curious, he drove closer. Once there, he stepped out into the rain, tugging his hood tight around his face. The fallen tree troubled him. A tree that size likely sheltered all kinds of wildlife. Its fall meant lost shelter and lost safety for many small creatures. But before he could think further, a low, deep rumble shook the ground beneath him. Looking around, his heart sank. A wall of mud and debris was speeding right toward him. It was a mudslide, and he didn't have time to make it back to the Jeep. Panic surged through him. There was nowhere high to run, and he knew he couldn't outrun it. The only thing he could do was climb onto the tree and hold on as tightly as he could. He didn't know if he'd survive, but he wasn't going to give up. When the muddy wave hit, it was like being caught in a flood of wet concrete. He clung to the tree with everything he had, trying not to get pulled under. Eventually, the rush began to slow, and Thomas realized he was still breathing. A tiny pocket of space had formed around him. Still, if help didn't come quickly, that bit of air wouldn't last long. He forced himself to stay calm, slowing his breath. Panicking wouldn't help, but deep down, he knew it might be a while before anyone noticed he was gone. The others were probably focused on the mudslide itself, not yet realizing he was missing. Through the narrow crack above him, he could tell the rain had started to let up. The mud was settling, getting heavier on his back, locking him in place. Everything was quiet now, eerily quiet. Then something blocked the light peeking through the gap. At first, he thought it was just his imagination, but it looked like sandy-colored fur. He could feel a weight above him. Something, or someone, was shifting through the mud. He squeezed his eyes shut, silently hoping it wasn't another landslide. As the minutes crawled by, the sounds around him grew louder, muffled voices, the shifting of earth, and he began to feel a tiny flicker of freedom. Then, through the thick silence, he heard something else. A powerful, low roar broke through the noise, followed by the sounds of people shouting nearby. It was enough to let him hope. But would anyone find him in time? His Jeep had likely been swept away, leaving no clue of where he had been. Then the roar came again, this time unmistakably close. There was a lion nearby. Suddenly, he heard his name being called. He couldn't respond, but just hearing it filled his eyes with tears. After spending so many years helping others, now he was the one in need. As a soft beam of light cut through the mud, Thomas saw the familiar faces of his fellow rangers reaching in to pull him out. He had no idea how they found him, but in that moment, all he felt was overwhelming gratitude. As they dragged him free, he couldn't decide whether to cry or laugh. Then, just a few steps away, he caught sight of a lion, streaked with mud and soaked from the rain. Thomas recognized him instantly. It was the same lion he had once rescued. As the lion quietly slipped out of view, one of the rangers gently wrapped a blanket around Thomas and helped him into a nearby vehicle. He was too stunned to speak, too overwhelmed to ask the flood of questions running through his mind. Once he was cleaned up and started to feel a little more like himself, the team began explaining what had happened. Though they encouraged him to get checked at a hospital, his injuries were minor enough to manage without it. They told him they'd heard the rumbling of the mudslide and waited until it stopped before heading out to inspect the damage. They split into teams to search for any trouble. Then one of the teams caught a strange radio message about a lion digging frantically in the mud. They assumed it was trying to reach another lion. But when they got closer, they realized it wasn't an animal the lion was trying to reach. It was Thomas. The whole team was stunned. Thomas had never imagined that the same lion he once saved from a cliff would someday return the favor. Everyone agreed. Without the lion's help, they wouldn't have found him in time. Just thinking about it was hard for Thomas to process. He knew deep down that he might not have survived without the lion. Although he didn't want to take time off, his team insisted. He finally agreed to rest for a week. But by the third day, he couldn't stay away. Dressed in his ranger uniform, he climbed into his Jeep and headed back. Sitting at home while so much recovery work was going on just didn't feel right. He had barely entered the park when he spotted a familiar figure under a nearby tree. It was the lion. The two locked eyes. Thomas slowed the Jeep and rolled down the window. With the mud gone from the lion's coat, there was no doubt. It was him. The lion watched Thomas for a few moments as he passed, then stood, gave a stretch, and slowly walked away, as if reassured that his human friend was okay. From that day on, things felt different. The lion, who had once kept his distance, now seemed more present. It was as if saving Thomas had brought back the confidence he lost after his own accident. He was seen around the park more often, much to Thomas's quiet joy. Something had changed between them. Their bond wasn't ordinary. They had both risked their lives for each other, and they both knew they might not be here without the other. That connection would always stay with them, a quiet gratitude that neither of them would forget. Now it's your turn. What would you have done if you were in Thomas's place? Have you ever heard of animals and humans helping each other in moments of need? We'd love to hear your thoughts, so feel free to drop a comment below. Thanks so much for watching and being part of this journey. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more real-life wildlife stories that show just how powerful the bond between humans and animals can be. See you in the next video.